The morning came in shades of deep grey, the murk-dust sky choked by thick clouds. The fire had long since burned to embers, and the damp air bit at the edges of the cavern. Argoz was already up, crouched over an old crate, muttering to herself as she dug through its contents. The sound of metal scraping against wood echoed through the small space, followed by the occasional grunt of either frustration or triumph. Lyra stretched lazily, watching from where she sat perched on a rock, arms folded behind her head. "You always talk to your weapons, or am I just lucky enough to witness this special moment?" Argoz didn't even glance up. "Shut up." Lyra smirked, pushing herself to her feet and sauntering over. "Find anything fun?" Argoz let out a triumphant noise and yanked something free. A dagger, small but wickedly sharp, its curved blade glinting in the low light. She turned it over in her hands, studying the faint, intricate runes carved along the hilt and down the blade's length. Lyra arched a brow. "That doesn't look like the junk you normally carry." Argoz snorted. "That's because it's not." She ran a finger along the runes, a faint shimmer of magic pulsing beneath her touch. "I had this made a long time ago. Just didn't think I'd ever need it." Lyra leaned in slightly. "What's it do?" Argoz smirked. "Depends on who's holding it." Lyra crossed her arms. "Vague." "I don't like vague." Argoz twirled the blade between her fingers. "Fine. You like details. Here's details. The enchantments work in layers." She held up a finger. "First, it siphons energy from its wielder. Not life, not magic, just intent. The stronger the will to fight, the sharper it gets, the deadlier it cuts." Lyra whistled low. "All right, that's interesting." Argoz held up a second finger. "Second, if it's thrown, it always finds its way back, but only if the throw was meant to kill." Lyra's smirk widened. "All right, that's fun." Argoz lifted a third finger. "And last, it has a little surprise baked in." She flipped the dagger in her grip, pointing it at a nearby chunk of stone. "Watch." She flicked her wrist and the dagger shot forward. The moment it struck the rock, boom! A burst of concussive force sent shards flying, a dust cloud kicking up in its wake. Lyra let out a sharp laugh. "Damn!" Argoz walked over and retrieved the dagger from the rubble, inspecting it. "It takes a few seconds to reset, but yeah, it's got a bit of a kick." Lyra grinned. "I love it. I also kind of hate that you had something that cool stashed away this whole time." Argoz shrugged. "Didn't exactly have a reason to use it before." She looked at Lyra, expression unreadable. "Now, I do." The weight in her voice made Lyra pause. Argoz tucked the dagger into her belt, then turned back to the crate, rifling through it again. "I've got more. Weapons, supplies, stuff Draven never found. If we're going to hit that research facility, we're going to need everything we can get." Lyra leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Argoz work. A wicked grin tugged at the corner of her lips. "Now this is starting to feel like a proper heist." Argoz turned the dagger over in her hands one last time, feeling the weight, the history behind it. This wasn't just another blade. It was something she had made long ago, something she had kept hidden, waiting for the right moment. She looked over at Lyra, who was still grinning like a damn fox, arms crossed as she watched Argoz dig through her old stash like a kid on winter's eve. With a sigh, Argoz stood and held out the dagger. "Here." Lyra blinked. "What?" Argoz rolled her eyes, shoving it toward her. "Take it." Lyra narrowed her gaze, suspicious. "Why?" "Because I owe you." Argoz scowled, shifting uncomfortably. "And because you're down a blade. I've seen how you fight. You're a two-dagger kind of lunatic. Consider this my way of keeping you at full strength." For once, Lyra didn't have a sarcastic retort. She hesitated before reaching out and taking the weapon, testing the grip, flipping it between her fingers. It was perfect. A little heavier than her ice dagger, but balanced in a way that felt almost natural. The runes pulsed faintly against her skin. She could feel the enchantments in it, the way the blade was waiting, hungry for intent, for the will to fight. Her smirk softened slightly. You sure? This thing's a work of art, Argoz scoffed, like I'd give you something cheap. Lyra chuckled, twirling the blade once more before tucking it into the sheath opposite her ice dagger. Now she was whole again. She looked back at Argoz, tilting her head. You do realize this means we're even, right? No more debts. Argoz crossed her arms. We were already even. Lyra grinned. Yeah, but now we really are. For a moment there was something unspoken between them, a strange sort of understanding. Then Lyra stretched with a groan. All right, now that we're all feeling warm and sentimental, let's figure out how we're going to burn Draven's little science project to the ground. Argoz huffed, turning back to the crate. Fine, but we do it my way. Lyra smirked. That's cute. You think I take orders? Argoz muttered something sharp in Goblin, but Lyra just laughed. The heist was on. Lyra spread the rough map across the rickety wooden table, flattening it with the hilt of her new dagger. The flickering torchlight cast jagged shadows over the worn parchment, but the layout was clear enough. Argoz leaned over it, arms crossed, studying the markings. So, Lyra began, tracing her finger along a jagged outline. Draven's research facility isn't some underground lab or fortress like you'd expect. It's an old military outpost they've reinforced. Stone walls, watchtowers, a couple of bunkers. They've repurposed the whole thing into a breeding ground for those new abominations. Argoz's expression darkened. And they need the Void Stone to keep production going. Bingo. Lyra tapped the northernmost section of the map. They're sitting on scraps, from what I've gathered. The moment they run out, production stops. If we hit them hard enough, they won't just lose resources, they'll lose progress. Argoz smirked. So we're not just stealing. Lyra's grin was all teeth. Oh no, we're ruining their day. Argoz huffed a laugh, then pointed at a section of the map. What about defences? Lyra leaned back against the table, arms crossed. Guards patrol in shifts. Most of them are normal grunts. Armed, but nothing special. A handful of Black Dawn elites are stationed there too, but no supers. Yet. Argoz frowned. What about magic? Lyra's smirk faded slightly. That's the one thing I haven't figured out yet. I've seen a few mages come and go, but nothing that screams fortified spell defense. If I had to guess, most of their magic is going into whatever experiments they're running inside. Argoz tapped her chin. That means we need to move before they finish those experiments. Exactly. Silence settled between them for a moment before Argoz gave a sharp nod. All right. Here's how we do this. Lyra raised a brow. Oh? This is your show now? Argoz shot her a smug look. Please. I stole the damn celestial gem from under Draven's nose. This is just another day at the office. Lyra chuckled, gesturing for her to continue. Argoz rolled out a second piece of parchment, one she'd been keeping in her stash. It was old, detailing an underground network of tunnels beneath the region. This facility? Argoz tapped a specific mark. Built on old structures. And guess what? Draven doesn't know about all of them. Lyra's grin widened. Oh, I like where this is going, Argoz continued, her voice picking up that eager edge Lyra had only heard a few times before, when she was in her element, in control. There's a collapsed tunnel entrance about a quarter mile from the outer wall. With a little effort, we can clear just enough to slip inside. No alarms, no guards. We pop up where they least expect it. Lyra nodded. And once we're in? We split up, Argoz said without hesitation. You cause chaos, disable their comms, set some fires, whatever makes them panic. She tapped a specific building. I'll get into their central vault, see what's worth stealing, and plant charges while I'm at it. Lyra's grin stretched wide. You really have done this before? Argoz smirked. And here I thought you were the expert. Lyra flipped her new dagger between her fingers, the runes catching the firelight. I am. That's why I know a damn good plan when I hear one. Argoz leaned forward, resting her hands on the table. One more thing, if we see anything Voidstone-related, we destroy it. We don't let them recover. Lyra nodded. Agreed. A beat of silence. Then Lyra clapped her hands together. All right, Goblin. Let's go break into a fortress. Argoz grinned. Now you're speaking my language. The forest pressed in around them, thick with damp earth and the scent of moss. Argoz led the way, moving with the confidence of someone who had spent her life slipping between shadows. Lyra followed just behind, steps light, her new dagger resting against her hip, fingers twitching in anticipation. They had been walking for nearly an hour, navigating through overgrown trails that only Argoz seemed to recognize. The deeper they went, the quieter everything became. No birds, no distant patrols, just the eerie silence of a place long forgotten. Lyra kept her voice low. Tell me again why you're so sure this tunnel is still here. Argoz shot her a smirk over her shoulder. Because I used it before. Back when Draven's idiots were still setting this place up, I scouted every tunnel, every path. He never found them all. Lyra hummed. So, we hope this entrance is still intact. Argoz didn't answer right away, which wasn't exactly reassuring. They reached a dense thicket, and Argoz crouched low, pushing some of the tangled branches aside. This is it. Lyra knelt beside her, peering past the brush. At first, she saw nothing, just more roots, more dirt, more forgotten wilderness. But then, as her eyes adjusted, she spotted the archway. The tunnel. Lyra grinned. Oh, that's inviting. Argoz huffed, standing. It's better than trying to go through the front door. They moved forward carefully, brushing aside more of the debris. The entrance was intact, but a partial cave-in blocked their way. Old stone and dirt had collapsed, but not entirely, just enough to be a problem. Lyra sighed, rolling her shoulders. All right, how much work are we talking here? Argoz crouched, running a hand along the edges of the fallen rocks. She nodded to herself. It's not bad. Some of this is loose, probably just the weight of time pressing down. We clear a few key pieces and we can squeeze through. Lyra smirked. You are small. Argoz shot her a glare. And you can learn to crawl. Lyra chuckled, shaking her head as she knelt beside her, pulling out a knife. Let's get to work. They worked in near silence, shifting stones and pulling loose the smaller chunks of debris. The air was thick with dust, and Lyra wiped a streak of grime from her cheek as she moved another stone aside. It was slow progress, but it was working. The tunnel beyond was revealing itself, inch by inch. Then, snap! Lyra stilled. That wasn't them. Argos's head jerked up, eyes locking onto hers. A twig. Behind them. Lyra inhaled slowly, fingers curling around her dagger. We've got company. Argoz didn't move, barely breathed. Her voice was just a whisper. How many? Lyra listened. The faint rustle of movement, slow and cautious. Not a patrol. Something smaller, quieter. Just one, Lyra murmured. Argoz turned slightly, angling her head toward the brush. I can handle it. Lyra smirked. I'd love to see that. Argoz glared at her before slipping into the shadows. Lyra stayed where she was, crouched near the tunnel entrance, eyes sweeping the tree line. Whoever it was, they were watching. Waiting. Another crunch, closer this time. Lyra tightened her grip on her blade, shifting her weight forward, ready to strike. Then, a sharp yelp, a scuffle, and a muffled curse. Lyra sighed, standing up and walking casually toward the noise. She pushed aside a branch and found Argoz standing over a figure sprawled in the dirt, pinned by a well-placed knee. A kid, no older than 16, dressed in ragged clothes, eyes wide with terror. Argoz had a blade pressed lightly against his throat, but she looked unimpressed. Lyra raised a brow. Seriously? Argoz huffed. He was sneaking. The kid swallowed hard, eyes darting between them. I wasn't... Lyra crouched beside him, smirking. Relax, kid. If we thought you were Black Dawn, you'd already be dead. The kid visibly paled. Argoz rolled her eyes. You're not helping. Lyra shrugged. It's not my fault he's bad at sneaking. Argoz sighed, easing off him slightly. All right. Who are you? And why are you out here? The boy hesitated before sitting up, rubbing his throat where Argos's blade had been. I live nearby. My village is a few miles east. Lyra tilted her head. And what exactly were you doing this far from home? The kid hesitated, then whispered, I was following them. Argos's eyes narrowed. Them? The boy nodded. Black Dawn. They came through here earlier, just a few, but they were looking for something. I saw them heading toward the ruins, but I didn't want to get too close. Lyra and Argoz exchanged glances. That was not good. Argoz frowned. How long ago? The kid swallowed. A few hours. Lyra muttered a curse under her breath. If they were here, then they might already know about the tunnels. Argoz stood. Then we don't have time to waste. She pulled the boy up by the collar, setting him on his feet. Go home. Stay out of trouble. The boy hesitated, looking between them. Are you going after them? Lyra smirked. Something like that. He swallowed hard but nodded, stepping back. Be careful. They're dangerous. Argoz snorted. So are we. The boy hesitated a second longer, then turned and vanished into the trees. Lyra sighed. Well, that complicates things. Argoz huffed. We still need to clear this tunnel faster now. Lyra smirked, cracking her knuckles. Then let's get moving. The tunnel was their best bet. If the Black Dawn had already searched the ruins, they clearly hadn't found what they were looking for. Otherwise, the place would have been crawling with patrols. Instead, the facility ahead was still quiet. Too quiet. Argoz wiped a streak of dirt from her cheek, glancing at Lyra. If they didn't find this tunnel, that means they weren't looking hard enough. Lyra smirked. Or they're just as dumb as I remember. Argoz huffed, pulling the last bit of debris away from the tunnel's entrance. A gust of stale air hit them as the darkness yawned open before them, deep and silent. Lyra adjusted her grip on her dagger. How long is this thing? Argoz peered inside. Few hundred meters. It runs beneath the fortress walls, then leads up through a storage chamber near the vault. Lyra raised a brow. And you're sure we're not about to crawl through some rat-infested, trap-laden death hole? Argoz smirked. No more than usual. Lyra sighed, shaking her head. Great. Let's go. They moved in near silence, the tunnel walls pressing close around them. It was just wide enough for them to crouch and move steadily forward, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and time-forgotten decay. Lyra kept a hand on the hilt of her dagger, eyes scanning ahead as they crept deeper. So, this storage chamber. How well do you remember it? Argoz kept her voice low. Enough. There's a back exit that leads into the main compound. If we get to the vault without raising alarms, we can strip it clean before the Black Dawn even knows we're here. Lyra hummed. And if they do know we're here? Argoz shrugged. Then we kill them. Lyra smirked. Now you're speaking my language. The tunnel eventually widened into a small enclosed chamber. Wooden crates and rusted metal shelves lined the walls, most of them covered in a thick layer of dust. Argoz ran a hand over one of the crates, checking for movement. No fresh tracks. No signs of a sweep. Lyra moved to the far side of the room, finding the old iron door embedded into the stone wall. She pressed a gloved hand against it, testing. Locked. Argoz grinned. Not for long. She pulled a thin set of lockpicks from her belt, crouching beside the door. The metal was old but sturdy. This was no ordinary storage room. It had been reinforced, built to keep something inside. The lock clicked once, then twice, then a low hiss. Lyra stiffened. Was that... Argoz froze. Get back. Lyra didn't hesitate. She moved, grabbing Argoz by the back of her collar and yanking her away from the door, just as a burst of gas hissed from the keyhole. Argoz swore, coughing as she pulled a scarf over her face. Shit, shit, I should have known. Lyra narrowed her eyes at the faint, sickly green mist curling through the air. That's not a normal booby trap. Argoz nodded. That's voidstone gas. Lyra clenched her jaw. They weren't just storing the stuff, they rigged this place to kill anyone who tried to break in. Argoz wiped her sleeve across her face, standing slowly. This means we're in the right place. Lyra exhaled, watching as the gas started to settle. And it means getting in won't be as easy as cracking a lock. Argoz took a deep breath, rolling her shoulders. All right, we still have options. Lyra arched a brow. Oh yeah? Argoz smirked. Yeah. 1. I pick the lock without setting off another trap. Lyra crossed her arms. Risky. 2. We blast the door open. Lyra snorted. Loud. 3. We find another way in. Lyra sighed. Slow. Argoz grinned. So, what's it going to be? Lyra tilted her head, thinking. The vault held the remaining weapons and chemicals the Black Dawn had been stockpiling. Whatever was inside, it was important. She exhaled slowly, then smirked. Argoz crouched beside the vault door, rolling her shoulders as she pulled a thin set of lockpicks from her belt. The trap had already been sprung, the void stone gas now settled into harmless residue across the floor. But that didn't mean there weren't more waiting for them. She exhaled sharply. This is going to take a minute. Lyra leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching. You know, for someone who brags about their skills, you sure do take your time. Argoz shot her a glare before returning her focus to the lock. You want fast or you want quiet? Because we don't get both. Lyra smirked. Fair point. The metal was old, the mechanism intricate, but this wasn't the first time Argoz had cracked something she wasn't supposed to. She felt out the pins, moving slow, her fingers precise. One by one, the lock started to shift. Click. Click. Lyra adjusted her grip on her dagger, staying alert. What are the chances they left something nasty waiting on the other side? Argoz didn't look up. Depends. You want to be optimistic or realistic? Lyra sighed. Realistic. Then yeah. Something nasty. Click. The last pin slid into place, and with a faint metallic snick, the lock disengaged. Argoz let out a slow breath, wiping the sweat from her brow. We're in. The air in the tunnel was stale, thick with the scent of damp earth and rusted metal. Lyra moved ahead, silent as a shadow, her Black Dawn rifle slung across her back. Behind her, Argoz followed, lighter on her feet now that she was back in her element. Lyra glanced over her shoulder. How much further? Not far, she whispered back. The facility's main power runs through a maintenance hall up ahead. If we follow it, we should reach the vault chamber. Lyra arched a brow. Should? Argoz smirked. Only one way to find out. They moved swiftly, sticking to the shadows, their boots barely making a sound against the packed dirt floor. The deeper they went, the colder it got. This place was ancient, an old structure repurposed by the Black Dawn, reinforced with steel and magic. The first obstacle appeared 10 minutes in, a checkpoint. 2 Black Dawn guards sat at a metal table playing a quiet game of dice. Their rifles leaned against the wall beside them, their armor loosened, helmets off. Lazy. Lyra exhaled. Amateurs. Argoz unsheathed her dagger. We can slip by if we hug the left wall. Lyra smirked. Or, Argoz twirled the blade between her fingers. Or we make sure they never sound the alarm. A beat of silence. Then Lyra nodded. Quietly. They split up. Lyra moved first, silent as death, her dagger flashing in the dim light. The first guard barely had time to react before she was behind him, slicing a clean line across his throat. He slumped forward, a gurgled breath escaping as Lyra eased him down without a sound. Argoz took the second. She was fast, efficient. Her dagger found its mark beneath his chin, angled up, one thrust, clean and silent. He went limp immediately, eyes wide with shock. Argoz caught his body before it hit the floor, lowering him carefully. Then, with practiced ease, she wiped her blade on his uniform. Lyra eyed her. You've done this before. Argoz smirked. Did you think I stole the celestial gem by asking nicely? With the checkpoint cleared, they pressed on. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, an old loading bay, long abandoned. Rusted catwalks crisscrossed above, and rows of empty crates lined the walls. A single reinforced door stood at the far end, sealed shut with a glowing magical lock. The vault. Argoz let out a slow breath. There it is. Lyra studied the area. Too open, too exposed. She pointed upward. Think we have company? Argoz scanned the catwalks. No movement, no noise. But that didn't mean much. Lyra pulled her rifle, flipping the safety off. I'll cover. You crack it. Argoz didn't hesitate. She crouched at the door, fingers working quickly. The magic lock was a problem. The runes pulsed faintly, shifting in sequence, a magical pattern constantly changing. Argoz cursed under her breath. What? Lyra whispered. They're using a shifting rune lock, Argoz muttered. I need a few seconds. Lyra exhaled sharply. You've got 10. Argoz worked faster. The magic flickered, the patterns shifting unpredictably. Lyra's grip tightened on her rifle. She counted the seconds. Then, a faint clink. The runes dimmed, the mechanism clicked, the door was unlocked. Argoz grinned. Told you. A shot rang out. Lyra spun, rifle raised. A Black Dawn patrol had entered from the opposite side of the chamber, 4 men, weapons raised. No time for silence. Lyra fired first, dropping one instantly. The remaining 3 scattered for cover. Move! Lyra barked, shoving Argoz toward the vault. Argoz didn't argue. She pushed the door open, diving inside. Lyra followed, slamming the door behind them. That could have gone smoother, Argoz panted. Lyra rolled her eyes. Yeah, well, when do things ever go smooth? The inside was cold, not naturally but magically. The walls shimmered faintly with runes, the air thick with something unnatural. And the contents? A nightmare. Rows of voidstone vials lined the walls, dozens of them. Weapons carefully arranged, humming with energy. Lyra approached a crate, popping the lid. Rifles, the new model. Argoz clicked her tongue. This is bad. Lyra nodded. Then let's make it worse. They moved fast. Argoz grabbed one rifle, her trophy, her weapon. But the rest? They burned. A set of detonators lined the back wall. Lyra rigged them to the major crates, voidstone, weapons, supplies. She stepped back, admiring the work. We should leave. Argoz flicked the detonator on. She grinned. Let's light it up. They ran. Behind them, fire roared. The explosion hit hard. The vault erupted behind them, a wave of searing heat chasing Lyra and Argoz into the corridor. The detonation wasn't just fire, it was pure destruction. The voidstone vials went up in a chain reaction, blue and violet flames racing across the chamber, igniting everything. The walls cracked, smoke poured through the tunnels, and then shouting. The Black Dawn patrol outside the vault had heard it all. Lyra barely had time to shove Argoz against the wall before a hail of gunfire ripped down the passage. Sparks showered from ricochets, the air filled with the sharp scent of burning magic as energy rounds impacted the stone. Guess they noticed, Argoz muttered. Lyra scowled. No shit. Move. They broke into a sprint. The first wave of Black Dawn soldiers surged forward, weapons raised, moving in formation. Too slow. Lyra didn't stop. She lifted the stolen Black Dawn rifle and fired. The energy blast took the lead soldier in the chest. The paralysis effect hit instantly, locking his muscles mid-step. He toppled forward like a statue, smashing into the ground face first. Argoz was already moving. She flicked a knife from her belt and threw it mid-run. The blade buried itself into the next soldier's neck. He hit the wall, gurgling before sliding lifelessly to the floor. The remaining 3 scattered for cover. "Damn it!" one of them shouted. "They're inside!" Lyra clicked her tongue. "Not for long!" She sprinted forward, closing the distance fast. The first soldier barely had time to swing his rifle before Lyra ducked low, slammed the butt of her weapon into his gut, and drove her knee into his face. Bone crunched. He collapsed, unconscious. Argoz, meanwhile, vanished. The last two soldiers hesitated, searching for her. Lyra grinned. "You should really check your pockets." One of them frowned. "What?" Click. The grenade Argoz had just slipped onto his belt went off. A flashbang. The explosion of light and sound sent the last two guards into a staggering, blinded panic. Argoz reappeared from the shadows, swept behind them, and slashed the back of their knees. They hit the ground, screaming. Lyra strode past them without a glance. "You're welcome to stay here and burn," she said coolly. The next corridor opened into a loading dock, their exit. And waiting there? More reinforcements. "Shit," Argoz muttered. 3 more Black Dawn soldiers, these ones in heavier armor, better trained and armed with the Black Dawn rifle. They had been waiting. An ambush. Lyra's mind raced. Not enough ammo, no cover. But she wasn't the only one thinking. Argoz grabbed Lyra's rifle mid-step. Lyra barely had time to react before the goblin whipped around and fired, but not at the soldiers. At the fuel barrels behind them. Boom! A secondary explosion rocked the loading dock. The force ripped through the room, sending fire and debris cascading outward. The Black Dawn soldiers were blown off their feet, armor smoking as they hit the floor. Argoz grinned. "Told you I never leave supplies behind." Lyra blinked. "I hate you." "Love you too. Now move." The firestorm raged behind them as they bolted toward the exit, slipping through the open cargo doors just as another detonation roared through the tunnels. The facility was coming down. The moment they hit open air, Lyra didn't stop. She grabbed Argoz's arm, dragging her toward the tree line as the ground quaked beneath them. The Black Dawn base behind them collapsed in on itself, flames consuming what was left. No alarms. No survivors, no evidence. Draven was going to lose his mind. They disappeared into the murk dust shadows, the night swallowing them whole. The hum of the overhead lights in Gunner's office barely cut through the silence. A battered fold-up table sat in place of his shattered desk, its flimsy aluminum legs already bowing slightly under the weight of scattered reports. The air smelled of stale coffee and gun oil. Gunner sat in his chair, back against the wall, reading the latest reports. It had been 3 days, and the cost of war had stacked up like corpses on a battlefield. The scars of the fight lingered everywhere. The war room still smelled of burned circuits from Eli's overload. The medical bay still carried the scent of blood. And out in the training grounds, the ground had yet to settle from the battle that nearly tore them apart. His fingers curled against the paper in front of him. Gunner leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, staring at the ceiling. He could still feel the tension in his cybernetic arm, the weight of everything pressing down on him. The fold-up table collapsed without warning. The weight of his arm had been too much. The legs buckled, and the table crashed to the floor, sending papers flying in every direction. The metal mug Bianca had brought him earlier clattered across the room, spilling cold coffee across the concrete. Gunner swore under his breath. A soft knock came at the door. He didn't answer immediately, just dragged a hand down his face before finally growling, "Come in." The door swung open, and Eliana stepped inside. She took in the scene at a glance, the shattered table, the mess of reports, the broken coffee mug. Her piercing blue eyes settled on him with quiet understanding. She closed the door behind her, letting it click softly into place. "You seem well," she said dryly. Gunner let out a sharp exhale, shaking his head. "Furniture's got a grudge against me." Eliana stepped over the mess, moving toward the only remaining intact chair in the room. She brushed dust off the seat before sitting gracefully. For a moment she said nothing, just studying him with that calm, knowing gaze that had always irritated him. "I spoke with the council," she finally said. Gunner's hands curled into fists against his knees. "And?" Eliana folded her hands in her lap, tilting her head slightly. The meeting is set for tomorrow morning. Silence filled the room. Gunnar let the words sink in, his jaw tightening slightly. So this was happening. There was no avoiding it, no postponing it. They expect Sophia and Regin. Eliana's voice remained even. They want to meet Echo Division's new leadership. They'll be assessing everything. Gunnar's grip on his knee tightened almost imperceptibly. Assessing? He repeated, the weight behind the word unmistakable. Eliana sighed softly. Gunnar. They're questioning whether Alfheim should continue supporting this war. That hit harder than he expected. Gunnar exhaled slowly through his nose, forcing himself to stay calm. He shouldn't be surprised. He'd expected this. He'd told himself 100 times that the Council never truly supported Echo Division. They supported Eliana. And now, with her loyalty in question, they were weighing their options. His eye flicked up to hers. They say that outright? Eliana's expression didn't change. They implied it. That was worse. Gunnar leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his organic hand running through his hair. They're looking for a reason to pull out. Eliana didn't answer immediately. Gunnar gave a dry, humorless chuckle. Guess it's a good thing I'm bringing Sophia and Regin. Nothing makes politicians feel safer than shaking hands with their own kind. Eliana's lips quirked, but it didn't reach her eyes. She studied him for a long moment before speaking again. I also have something else. For Rose. Gunnar looked up. There's a portal prepared, she continued. She'll have access to what she needs to begin her work. You'll have to tell her. Gunnar nodded absently, his mind already moving past it. This wasn't just about Rose or Sophia, or even the Council. This was about control. Who had it, and who was losing it? And right now, it sure as hell wasn't him. He exhaled slowly, shifting in his chair before pushing himself to his feet. His cybernetic arm whirred slightly with the movement. He cast a glance at the broken table, the mess on the floor, and let out a tired grunt. Need a ride? He muttered. Eliana arched a brow. Where are you going? Facility. Gunnar grabbed his jacket from the chair, shrugging it on as he moved toward the door. Not wasting time with a damn radio call. She hesitated for only a second before standing as well. Then I'll accompany you. Gunnar held the door open, waiting. She stepped past him, and together they walked out of the office. The garage smelled of oil, gunpowder, and frustration. Darren and Caleb stood over the disassembled minigun, its parts spread across the workbench in a meticulous yet chaotic mess. Caleb was deep in concentration, carefully aligning a component, while Darren stood beside him, arms crossed, clearly annoyed at the damn thing for jamming in the first place. This piece of shit has fired thousands of rounds and suddenly decides to lock up on me? Darren muttered, shaking his head. I swear, if this was a woman, I'd be calling my ex to see if she hexed me. Caleb didn't look up. Maybe it just doesn't like how you handle it. Darren turned, giving him a deadpan look. That's supposed to be a joke, Junior? Caleb smirked, still focused. Nah, just saying. Maybe it needs a gentler touch. Darren scoffed. It's a goddamn minigun. It doesn't need a gentle touch. It needs respect. Gunnar pushed open the garage door, stepping in with Eliana at his side. Both men immediately looked up, because Gunnar never walked in casually. He either stormed in or barked orders from the doorway. But this was different. Then it got weirder. Gunnar stopped beside the Wolfmobile, running a hand over the reinforced armor before turning to Darren. Mind if I take your baby for a drive? He asked, completely straight-faced. Silence. Darren blinked. Caleb froze mid-adjustment. Eliana arched a brow, watching the exchange with mild amusement. Darren looked at Gunnar, then at the Wolfmobile, then back at Gunnar. You feeling okay, boss? Caleb, smirking, muttered. Might want to check if he's been drinking. Gunnar ignored them, pulling open the passenger door. He turned to Eliana, and for the first time in a long time, he grinned. Hang on, he told her. Eliana gave him a skeptical look but didn't hesitate as she stepped into the wolfmobile. Darren's brain finally caught up. Wait, what the… Hey! Too late. Gunnar dropped into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and tore out of the garage like a bat out of hell. The wolfmobile fishtailed, tires kicking up gravel and dust as it rocketed forward. Darren cursed, throwing up an arm against the dust cloud. Caleb, watching the wolfmobile tear off into the distance, muttered, "Well, that just happened." Darren turned, pointing a finger at Caleb. "That's it. We're adding a damn tracking system to that thing." The engine roared, the reinforced suspension absorbing the terrain as Gunnar pushed the limits on the barely paved road toward the facility. Eliana, gripping the handlebar on the side, glanced at him. "This level of speed is unnecessary." Gunnar smirked, eyes still on the road. "Told you to hang on." Gunnar nodded. "Yeah, figured they'd appreciate that over a radio call." Eliana studied him for a moment. "You're taking this well." Gunnar's grip on the wheel tightened slightly. Not much choice, is there? Eliana said nothing, just watched him. Gunnar kept his eyes forward, but his mind wasn't on the road. Echo Division was changing. The pack was separating from it. And now Alfheim was re-evaluating their involvement. He didn't say it, but Eliana knew. This wasn't just another fight. This was the beginning of something much bigger. And Gunnar wasn't sure if they'd be ready for it. The wolfmobile roared across the terrain, tearing through the distance between the workshop and the facility with reckless speed. Dust kicked up in thick clouds behind them, the powerful engine growling like a beast unleashed. Gunnar was at the wheel, his single blue eye locked on the road ahead, mouth set in a smirk that wasn't quite humour but something close to satisfaction. In the passenger seat, Eliana clutched the grab bar, her usual composed demeanour shaken, just slightly. She'd fought demons, stood before the council, faced horrors beyond imagination. But this was new. When the wolfmobile hit a rut, the entire vehicle jerked violently. Gunnar barely reacted. Eliana, on the other hand, let out a sharp breath, her silver hair whipping around her face as she shot him a look. That was, she inhaled, steadying herself, unnecessarily reckless. Gunnar just smirked, one hand on the wheel as he maneuvered them toward the facility gates. "You think that was reckless? You should have seen me in my prime." Maybe both. Her usual ethereal poise was shaken, her hair dishevelled, adrenaline still humming in her veins. She hadn't experienced anything quite like Gunnar behind the wheel of a high-powered war machine. The wolfmobile slid to a stop just outside the facility, the sudden halt sending another wave of dust into the air. Gunnar casually stepped out, not even winded, while Eliana took a moment longer. As she climbed out, she ran a hand through her silver hair, attempting to restore some order, but it was futile. Her usual pristine elegance had been completely ruined by the ride. The facility guards at the gate stared. Not at Gunnar. They were used to his gruff, no-nonsense attitude. But Eliana, the regal poised guardian of Alfheim, she looked utterly rattled. Even the elves standing post glanced at each other, not quite sure what to make of the sight. Darren would have had a field day if he'd been here to witness this. Eliana straightened, regaining composure, though the slight flush in her cheeks remained. With a sharp exhale, she shot Gunnar a look. "I assume you drive like that to test the resilience of those around you?" Gunnar snorted. "Nah, that was me taking it easy." She narrowed her eyes but didn't argue. Instead, she tilted her chin up, stepping forward as if she hadn't just been rattled within an inch of her life. Inside, Sophia was waiting, along with Regin. The moment Gunnar walked in, Regin arched a brow. "Enjoy the ride?" Eliana just exhaled sharply and brushed past them. "Let's get this over with." Gunnar smirked, falling into step behind her. It was time to make this official.